The administratum audits everything, every shell fired, every grain of wheat, every single human life across 1,000,000 worlds. But when one man traced the numbers too carefully, he found something they weren't supposed to see. Entire planets die on schedule, billions vanish from the ledgers, and the Imperium calls it acceptable losses. But what if those losses weren't accidents? What if they were the plan all along? I learned the truth when I was 43 years old, and by then I had spent 26 of those years serving the administratum with the kind of devotion that most reserve for the God Emperor himself. My name is Martrin Kull, and I was an adept fiscalis of the 7th Echelon, 3rd Subsector Logistics Division, assigned to the trailing edge of Segmentum Pacificus, where the light of the Astronomicon grows thin and the paperwork grows thick. I wore the grey robes of my station without complaint. I carried my data slate like a shield. I believed, as all functionaries believe, that the work I did mattered, that every corrected decimal and reconciled ledger was a brick in the great wall that held back the dark. I was wrong about the wall. I was wrong about the bricks. I was wrong about what the administratum truly protects. The assignment arrived on a cold morning in the depths of the hive city where I lived and worked, a place called Ossuary Prime, where the air tasted of metal and the sky was a perpetual grey haze, backlit by the glow of manufactorums that never slept. My quarters were small, a single room with a cot, a shrine to the Emperor that I tended daily, and a writing desk where I filed my reports with the precision of a man who believed order was sacred. The vox chime woke me before dawn, and I dressed in the dark, pulling on my robes and fastening the brass clasps with the automatic movements of long habit. The message was encoded in the standard cipher used for logistics reviews, and when I decrypted it, I saw that I had been selected for an audit of unusual scope. Indomitus Crusade Logistics, it said. Multi-system population reconciliation. Priority classification Omega 7. Report to Sanctum Calculatus immediately. I felt nothing at first. The administratum trains you not to feel. Emotion is inefficiency. Curiosity is deviation. You are given a task, and you complete it, and the reasons behind the task are as distant and incomprehensible as the thoughts of the Emperor himself. I took my breakfast, a thin gruel flavored with synth protein paste, and I walked the 12 kilometers to the Sanctum Calculatus because the transit rails were down again and no one had bothered to repair them. The streets were crowded with workers making their way to the lower hive factories, their faces hidden behind rebreathers, their eyes dull with the kind of exhaustion that becomes permanent after a few years of service. I passed through the crowds like a ghost, unremarked and unremarkable, just another functionary in a galaxy where functionaries outnumber soldiers 1,000 to 1. The Sanctum Calculatus rose from the heart of the administrative district like a monument to tedium, a vast grey tower covered in statues of saints holding scrolls and quills, each one weathered by centuries of acid rain until their features were smooth and featureless. I showed my credentials to the servitors at the gate, skull-faced things with mechadendrites that clicked and whirred as they scanned my ident chip, and they allowed me to pass without comment. Inside, the air was cooler, filtered and recycled until it smelled of nothing at all, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of cogitators processing data that no human would ever read. I climbed a spiral staircase to the 73rd floor, where the offices of the Logistics Review Division occupied a series of vaulted chambers lit by flickering lumens that cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. My superior was waiting for me in a room that smelled of old parchment and machine oil. His name was Proctor Velis Harkin, a man so old that his skin had taken on the texture of cured leather, stretched tight over bones that seemed too sharp to be human. He wore the black robes of a senior auditor, and his augmetic eyes glowed faintly red in the dim light, twin embers of scrutiny that never blinked. He did not greet me. He simply gestured to the chair across from his desk, a heavy thing carved from some dark wood that creaked when I sat, and he slid a data wafer across the polished surface toward me. "Take this," he said. His voice was dry and flat, the voice of a man who had spoken the same words so many times that they had lost all meaning. You will review the population loss reports from 17 systems along the Indomitus Crusade supply line. Cross-reference casualty figures with tithe compliance, warp transit logs, and faith output metrics. Identify discrepancies. Submit your findings within 30 standard days. I took the wafer and slotted it into my data slate, and the screen lit up with columns of numbers so dense that they blurred together into abstract patterns. 17 systems, billions of souls, trillions, perhaps. The scale was incomprehensible, but that was the nature of the work. The administratum does not deal in individuals. It deals in aggregates, in statistical masses, in the cold arithmetic of empire. I asked no questions. I simply nodded, rose, and left the room, the data wafer warm against my palm. The work began that same afternoon. I set up my workspace in one of the smaller archive chambers, a room lined with shelves that reached up into darkness, filled with scrolls and books and data crystals that no one had touched in centuries. I requisitioned a cogitator terminal, an old model that wheezed and clicked as it processed data, and I began the slow work of cross-referencing the reports. The first system was called Valdris Secundus, a mining world in the Ultima Segmentum, and according to the initial census records, it had a population of 8 billion souls at the start of the Crusade. 5 years later, the population had dropped to 3 billion. The difference was listed as acceptable losses, a term the administratum uses to describe deaths that do not require explanation. I frowned at that. 5 billion souls. Acceptable. I pulled up the casualty reports and began to read. The records told a story of famine, plague, and industrial collapse. Valdris Secundus had been stripped of its resources to feed the crusade, its mines emptied, its factories retooled to produce munitions and armor plate, its food stocks requisitioned and shipped off-world. The population had starved slowly over the course of 3 years, and the mortality rate had been tracked with the kind of clinical precision that the administratum reserves for matters of importance. There were charts showing the decline in birth rates, graphs illustrating the rise in disease, and reports from local enforcers detailing riots and mass executions. And yet, at the bottom of the final report, there was a notation that made me pause. Tithe compliance maintained at 97% throughout crisis period. Faith output increased by 42%. Warp stability improved by 18% in surrounding subsectors. I read that line again, slowly, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Faith output, warp stability. These were not terms you typically saw in population reports. Faith output was a metric used by the ecclesiarchy to measure devotional activity, the number of prayers offered, the frequency of shrine attendance, the intensity of worship. Warp stability was a measure tracked by the navigators and the astropaths, a way of quantifying how calm or turbulent the Imperium was in a given region. And yet here they were, listed alongside casualty figures, as if they were somehow related, as if the deaths of 5 billion souls had been expected, as if they had been planned. I moved on to the next system, Carthon IV. Population at Crusade start, 12 billion. Population 5 years later, 4 billion. Acceptable losses, 8 billion. The pattern repeated. Resource extraction, food shortages, plague, the slow grinding death of a world. And at the bottom of the report, the same notation. Tithe compliance maintained, faith output increased by 39%. Warp stability improved by 21%. I checked a third system, a fourth, a fifth. Every report was the same. I worked through the night, my eyes burning from the glow of the cogitator screen, my fingers cramping from the endless data entry. The archive chamber grew colder as the hours passed, and I could hear the distant sounds of the hive outside, the groan of machinery, the hiss of steam vents, the occasional scream that echoed through the ventilation shafts and then faded into silence. I ignored it all. I had found something, a pattern in the numbers, and I could not look away. By the time the first grey light of dawn filtered through the narrow windows high above, I had reviewed all 17 systems, and the truth was undeniable. 53 billion souls had died. Not in battle, not in some sudden catastrophe. They had died slowly, methodically, their deaths spread out over years, and every single world had shown the same improvements in tithe compliance, faith output, and warp stability. It was not a coincidence. It could not be. The Administratum does not believe in coincidences. Every number has a reason. Every pattern has a cause. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen, and I felt the first stirrings of something I had not felt in many years. Fear. Not the kind of fear you feel when facing an enemy, but the deeper fear that comes when you realize that the world is not what you thought it was, that the foundations you built your life on are rotten, that the truth is something terrible and inescapable. I should have stopped there. I should have written a simple report confirming the figures, noting the discrepancies, and moving on to the next assignment. But I did not. I could not. I had been trained to find patterns, to trace connections, to uncover the hidden logic behind the numbers, and this logic was too vast, too monstrous, to ignore. I needed to understand. I needed to know why. The next phase of my investigation took me deeper into the archives, into records that were not supposed to be accessed without authorization from the upper echelons. I used my credentials carefully, slipping through security protocols that were designed to stop curious functionaries like me, and I began pulling files that were marked with classifications I had never seen before. Restricted, some said. Eyes only, said others. And some, the oldest and most disturbing, were marked with symbols that I did not recognize, angular runes that seemed to twist in the dim light, as if they were not quite fixed on the parchment. I found a document dated 3 centuries earlier, a strategic analysis prepared for a Lord Commander whose name had been redacted. The document outlined something called the Martyrdom Stabilization Protocol, a theoretical framework for managing faith output across segmentums during periods of extended conflict. The logic was cold and precise. When populations are subjected to extreme suffering, the document explained, their devotional intensity increases exponentially. Prayers become more fervent, martyrs become more common. The collective psychic resonance of suffering humanity creates a localized effect in the warp, a kind of spiritual pressure that pushes back against the encroachment of chaos. In regions where faith output is high, warp storms are less frequent, demonic incursions are less severe, and astropathic communication is more reliable. The document went on. However, this effect diminishes over time as populations adapt to suffering or become too depleted to maintain devotional activity. Therefore, suffering must be carefully calibrated. Too little, and faith output remains stagnant. Too much, and the population collapses entirely, becoming useless for both tithe and devotional purposes. The optimal approach is to engineer controlled die-offs, allowing populations to decline to a sustainable baseline while maximizing the period of peak faith output. This can be achieved through resource redirection, medical supply denial, and strategic neglect of infrastructure. The key is to ensure that the population perceives their suffering as a test from the Emperor, a trial that demands their faith rather than as a failure of imperial administration. I read those words 3 times, and each time they seemed more impossible, more obscene. Controlled die-offs, strategic neglect, peak faith output. These were not the ravings of a heretic. This was official imperial doctrine, written by someone high enough in the hierarchy to shape policy across entire segmentums. I checked the authorization seals at the bottom of the document, and my hands began to shake. The seals were authentic. This was not some apocryphal text or forged manifesto. This was real. I pulled more files. I found reports from ecclesiarchy observers embedded in worlds undergoing die-offs, chronicling the rise in shrine attendance, the increase in self-flagellation rituals, the surge in martyrdom declarations. I found logistical studies that calculated the economic value of mass death, showing how the reduction in population lowered food and medical costs, allowing more resources to be diverted to the war effort. I found astropathic surveys that mapped warp stability against casualty rates, demonstrating a clear correlation between human suffering and calmer warp currents. And I found, buried in a file marked for destruction but never destroyed, a list of worlds scheduled for die-off over the next century. Hundreds of worlds, trillions of souls, each one carefully selected based on strategic value, resource depletion, and faith output potential. The pattern was clear. The Imperium was not failing to save these worlds. The Imperium was choosing to let them die. No, not letting them die. Engineering their deaths. Using their suffering as a tool. Spending their lives like currency to stabilize the warp, to fuel the war machine, to maintain the cold and brutal efficiency of an empire that spanned 1,000,000 worlds. I sat in the darkness of the archive, surrounded by the evidence of atrocity, and I felt something break inside me. I had spent my entire adult life believing that the work I did mattered, that the administratum existed to protect humanity, that every number I tallied and every ledger I balanced was part of some greater purpose. But the purpose was not protection, it was optimization. Humanity was not the thing being saved. Humanity was the fuel being burned. I should have walked away. I should have erased the files, submitted a sanitized report, and returned to my quiet life of numbers and routine. But I could not. I was an auditor. I had found an inefficiency, a heretical inefficiency, and I was bound by oath and training to report it. I began to compile my findings into a formal report. It took me 3 days, working in secret, triple-checking every source, cross-referencing every claim. I wrote with the cold precision of a man who believes that facts can change the world, that truth has power, that the system can be corrected if only the right people are made to see. I documented the die-offs. I outlined the martyrdom stabilization protocol. I calculated the true cost, not just in lives but in moral authority, in the trust that the Imperium demanded from its subjects. I concluded with a recommendation that the practice be investigated and discontinued, that the worlds on the scheduled list be given aid instead of abandonment, that the administratum return to its true purpose of service and protection. I sealed the report and submitted it through official channels, addressed to the High Proctor of Segmentum Pacificus, with copies flagged for review by the Inquisition and the Ecclesiarchy. I used every authorization code I had. I invoked protocols designed for whistleblowers and loyal servants who uncover corruption. I did everything by the book, because I still believed, even then, that the book mattered. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. 6 days after I submitted my report, I was summoned to the upper levels of the Sanctum Calculatus, to chambers I had never been allowed to enter, where the walls were lined with gold leaf and the air smelled of incense instead of machine oil. I was escorted by 2 arbitrators, silent men in black carapace armor who did not look at me as we walked. They led me through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past doorways guarded by servitors with weapons built into their arms, past chapels where robed figures knelt in endless prayer, past cogitator chambers where the hum of processing was so loud it made my teeth ache. We stopped before a door carved from a single piece of black stone, inlaid with silver script in high Gothic that I could not read. One of the arbitrators pressed his palm to a scanning panel, and the door swung open with a hiss of pressurized air. They gestured for me to enter, and then they were gone. The door sealing shut behind me with a sound like a tomb closing. The room beyond was vast and circular, lit by a single chandelier that hung from the vaulted ceiling like a cluster of iron stars. The floor was polished marble, so smooth that it reflected the light in shimmering pools, and the walls were covered in tapestries depicting scenes of imperial triumph, armies marching across burning worlds, saints ascending into golden light, the Emperor himself seated on the throne of terror with a halo of fire around his head. At the center of the room was a long table made of dark wood, and seated around it were 7 figures in robes of black and crimson, their faces hidden behind masks of hammered silver. I stood there, uncertain, my heart pounding in my chest. No one spoke. The silence stretched out, broken only by the faint creak of the chandelier swaying above. Then, one of the figures rose, tall and thin, and gestured to an empty chair at the table. "Sit, Adept Kull," the figure said, and the voice was soft and androgynous, filtered through a vox grill in the mask. "You have done exemplary work." I sat, because there was nothing else to do. My mouth was dry, my hands were shaking. I tried to speak, to explain, to ask what was happening. But the figure raised a hand and I fell silent. "We have reviewed your report," the figure continued. "It is thorough, meticulous, a testament to your skill as an auditor. You have identified patterns that most functionaries would overlook, and you have traced them to their logical conclusion. You have demonstrated an understanding of the deeper mechanisms of imperial governance that is rare and valuable. For this, we commend you." I felt a flicker of hope then, fragile and desperate. They understood. They saw the horror. They would act. The figure reached into its robes and produced a data slate, placing it on the table before me. The screen glowed softly, displaying a single document. I leaned forward and read the words at the top. "Promotion authorization, Adept Fiscalis Matron Kull, elevation to Proctor Initiate, 8th Echelon, Strategic Resource Management Division, effective immediately." I stared at the screen, confused. A promotion, not a reprimand, not an execution. A promotion. The figure sat back down, and another one leaned forward, its mask catching the light so that I could not see any features, only smooth silver and the faint reflection of my own face, distorted and pale. "You were not supposed to uncover this," the second figure said. Its voice was deeper, masculine, tinged with something that might have been amusement. "The martyrdom stabilization protocol is not a secret, precisely, but it is knowledge reserved for those who have demonstrated the necessary clarity of vision. You have demonstrated that clarity. You understand the logic. You see the necessity. And now you will help us implement it." "No," I said. The word came out as a whisper, barely audible. I found myself shaking my head, my thoughts racing. "No, you do not understand. I filed that report to stop this, to expose it. It is heretical. It is monstrous. We are killing trillions of our own people." "Heretical," the first figure repeated, and this time there was a note of something almost like pity in its voice. "No, Adept Kull, what you have uncovered is not heresy, it is orthodoxy, the highest orthodoxy. The Imperium has endured for 10,000 years not because it protects every life, but because it understands that some lives must be spent to preserve the whole. The Emperor protects, yes, but protection is not the same as preservation. The Emperor protects the species, the Imperium, the idea, individual worlds, individual populations. These are expendable. They always have been." I tried to stand, but my legs would not move. I felt as if the weight of the room was pressing down on me, as if the air itself had turned solid. Another figure spoke, this one with a voice like grinding stone. "You believe this is a mistake," it said. "An error, a deviation from our purpose, but you are wrong. The Imperium was built on sacrifice. Every saint in the tapestries behind you died in agony. Every hero whose name we remember gave their life in service. Why should the nameless masses be any different? Their suffering is their service. Their deaths are their tithe. And the faith they generate in their final moments, that is the light that holds back the darkness." The third figure gestured to the data slate. "Your new assignment is simple," it said. "You will review the scheduled die-off list for the next fiscal cycle. You will select 3 worlds that meet the criteria for optimal faith output and warp stabilization. You will authorize the resource redirection and infrastructure neglect necessary to begin the process. And you will monitor the results, ensuring that the die-offs proceed according to projections. This is your duty now. This is how you serve the Emperor. I could not breathe. I could not think. The room seemed to tilt around me, the tapestries blurring into smears of color, the chandelier above swaying wildly even though there was no wind. I thought of Valdris Secundus, of the 5 billion souls who had starved while the administratum tracked their faith output, like farmers tracking crop yields. I thought of Carthan IV, of the children who had died in the plague wards while their parents prayed to an emperor who had already decided their fate. I thought of the list, the hundreds of worlds waiting to be sacrificed, the trillions who would die because someone like me sat in a room like this and authorized their deaths with a stylus and a data slate. I cannot do this, I said. My voice was shaking. I cannot. The first figure leaned forward, and I saw my reflection again in its mask, small and pathetic. You can, it said, and you will, because you are loyal, because you are intelligent enough to understand the necessity, and because, if you refuse, you will be declared a heretic and executed, and someone else will take your place. Someone less capable. Someone who might make errors. Someone who might waste the deaths you wish to prevent. At least, if you do this, their suffering will have meaning. At least their sacrifice will serve a purpose. The logic was perfect. Cruel and perfect. I opened my mouth to argue, to refuse, to scream, but no words came out. I sat there, silent, as the figures rose from the table and began to file out of the room, their robes whispering against the marble floor. The last one paused at the door and looked back at me, its mask glinting in the light. You have 3 days to make your selections, it said. Submit the authorization codes by the end of the week. Welcome to the 8th echelon, Proctor Cull. The Emperor protects. The door closed, and I was alone. I sat there for hours, staring at the data slate, at the promotion authorization glowing on the screen. I thought about running, about fleeing into the underhive, into the wilderness beyond the walls, into the void if I could find a ship, but I knew there was nowhere to go. The Imperium is infinite. Its reach is absolute. There is no escape from the system, only service within it. I thought about destroying the data slate, about sabotaging the files, about doing something, anything, to stop what was coming. But I knew that would change nothing. The list would remain, the die-offs would proceed, another functionary would be assigned, the machine would continue. I thought about prayer. I had always prayed, every morning and every night, offering my devotion to the Emperor like a good servant. But now, alone in that vast chamber, I could not bring myself to kneel. I could not bring myself to ask for guidance from a being who, if the tapestries and the masks and the files were to be believed, had built his empire on the calculated suffering of his own people. What kind of God demanded such worship? What kind of God was worth such a price? I took the data slate and left the room. The corridors were empty now, the arbitrators gone, the servitors standing silent in their alcoves. I walked through the sanctum calculatus like a man in a dream, my footsteps echoing off the walls, my mind numb with shock. I descended the spiral staircase to the 73rd floor, retrieved my personal effects from my old workspace, and made my way out into the streets of Ossuary Prime. The sun was setting, casting the hive in shades of rust and shadow, and the air was thick with smoke from the factories below. I walked through the crowds again, past the workers with their dull eyes and their rebreathers, and I realized that I was looking at them differently now, not as individuals, not as souls, as numbers, as resources, as fuel for a machine that had no mercy and no end. I returned to my quarters and sat at my desk, staring at the shrine to the Emperor that I had tended for so many years. The candlelight flickered across the golden aquila, casting shifting shadows on the wall. I thought about taking the shrine down, about smashing it, about renouncing the faith that had sustained me, but I did not. Because faith was not the problem. Faith was the product. Faith was what they harvested, what they weaponized, what they used to keep the Imperium alive, and I was part of that harvest now. I was one of the reapers. 3 days later, I submitted my selections. I chose 3 worlds from the list, each one meeting the criteria outlined in the files: high populations, resource depletion, proximity to warp instability zones. I authorized the resource redirections, the medical supply denials, the infrastructure neglect. I wrote the orders in the cold, precise language of the administratum, using phrases like acceptable losses and strategic reallocation, and I sealed them with my new authorization codes. I did not hesitate. I did not allow myself to think about what I was doing. I simply executed the task, because that is what functionaries do. We execute, we process, we serve. The first world to die was called Thalos Minor, a farming world in the Segmenta Multima with a population of 6 billion souls. I never visited it. I never saw its fields or its cities or its people. I only saw the reports as they came in over the following months. Crop failures due to redirected irrigation resources, famine spreading across the southern continent, plague outbreaks in the overcrowded refugee camps, riots, executions, mass graves dug by servitors while the priests of the ecclesiarchy stood by and preached about the glory of martyrdom, and at the bottom of each report, the numbers that mattered. Faith output increasing, tithe compliance maintained, warp stability improving. I watched the numbers rise, and I felt nothing. That was the worst part. I should have felt horror, or guilt, or rage, but I felt nothing. The numbers were abstract. The deaths were distant, and after a while, they stopped being deaths at all. They became metrics, variables, data points on a graph that curved upward towards some optimal value that I could calculate but not comprehend. The second world was called Karsis VII, a mining colony with a population of 4 billion. The process was the same: resource redirection, infrastructure collapse, slow death. And the third world, Viridian Nix, a hive world with a population of 12 billion, died even faster than the others because its systems were already strained, already fragile, and the removal of Imperial support was like pulling a thread from a tapestry and watching the whole thing unravel. By the end of the fiscal cycle, 22 billion souls had died across the 3 worlds I had selected, and the Imperium was stronger for it. The warp routes in the surrounding sectors stabilized, astropathic communication improved, faith output surged across a dozen neighboring systems as news of the martyrdom spread. The numbers proved the theory, the die-offs worked, the suffering served a purpose, and I was promoted again, elevated to Proctor Secundus, given authority over a larger segment of the logistics network, tasked with overseeing more die-offs, more selections, more sacrifices. I stopped praying after the first year. Not because I stopped believing, but because I realized that prayer was irrelevant. The Emperor, if he existed at all, did not care about individual suffering. He cared about the Imperium, about the species, about the idea. And the Imperium required suffering to function. It required sacrifice. It required people like me, sitting in small rooms with data slates, making selections, authorizing deaths, optimizing the harvest of faith and blood. I have been doing this work for 5 years now. I have authorized the deaths of 147 billion souls across 63 worlds. I have watched the graphs rise and fall. I have read the reports. I have seen the efficiency of the system, the brutal elegance of it, and I have come to understand something that most people never will. The Imperium does not protect humanity. It spends humanity. It burns through lives like fuel, like ammunition, like any other resource, because that is what humanity is to the Imperium. A resource, renewable if managed correctly, expendable when necessary. Survival is not a right. It is not even a goal. Survival is an accounting error that occasionally persists. And most of us, the vast majority of humanity spread across 1 million worlds, are not meant to survive. We are meant to serve, to suffer, to die in ways that maximize our value to the system. The lucky ones die quickly, in battle, with their faith intact. The unlucky ones die slowly, in famines and plagues, their suffering carefully calibrated to generate the maximum devotional output before they expire. I think about Valdris Secundus sometimes, about the 5 billion who died there before I ever touched the files. I think about Thalos Minor, about the farmers who watched their crops wither and their children starve while the priests told them it was the Emperor's will. I think about all the worlds on the list, all the trillions waiting to die, and I wonder if any of them suspect the truth. I wonder if they know that their deaths are planned, authorized, optimized. I wonder if it would change anything if they did. It would not. The system is too vast, too old, too entrenched. You cannot fight it. You cannot escape it. You can only serve it in whatever capacity you are assigned, and hope that your service earns you a quick death instead of a slow one. I still live in the same quarters in Ossuary Prime, though I could afford better now. I still tend my shrine, though I do not kneel before it. I still file my reports with the same precision I always have, because precision is all I have left. The work continues. The die-offs continue, the Imperium continues, and I continue, a cog in a machine that grinds souls into faith and calls it salvation. They tell us the Emperor protects, and perhaps he does, but not us, not the individuals, not the billions who die in his name. He protects the idea of humanity, the abstract concept, the species as a whole, and the Imperium that serves him has learned to do the same. It protects the system, the structure, the machine, and it spends the people inside it without hesitation, without remorse, because that is what the people are for. I learned this truth when I was 43 years old, and I have carried it with me every day since. It is a heavy truth, the kind that bends your spine and crushes your spirit, but it is the truth nonetheless. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night staring at the ceiling of my quarters, is that I understand the logic. I see the necessity. I cannot argue with the numbers. The die-offs work. The suffering serves a purpose. And if I were to refuse, to walk away, to try to stop it, nothing would change except that someone else would take my place, someone less capable. Someone who might waste the deaths I have authorized, someone who might make errors. So I continue. I select the worlds. I authorize the orders. I watch the numbers rise, and I tell myself that this is service, that this is duty, that this is what the Emperor demands of his servants. But late at night, when the hive is quiet, and the only sound is the distant hum of the manufactorums, I wonder if service and damnation are the same thing. If duty and atrocity can be separated, if the Emperor I was taught to worship would recognize the Imperium built in his name. I do not have answers to these questions. I do not think anyone does. But I have the data, I have the reports, I have the truth, laid out in columns and graphs and casualty projections. And the truth is this: the Imperium does not fail to save its people. It chooses not to. It engineers their suffering. It harvests their faith. It spends their lives with the same cold calculation that it spends ammunition and fuel and steel. And I am the one who does the spending. There is a new world on my desk now, a file marked for review. The planet is called Secundus Majoris, a hive world with a population of 18 billion, and the projections show that a carefully managed die-off could yield a faith output increase of 53% and a warp stability improvement of 31% in the surrounding subsector. The criteria are met. The authorization is straightforward. All I need to do is apply my seal, submit the orders, and move on to the next file. It is a simple task, routine, just another number in an endless ledger. I sit here with the data slate in my hands, and I think about the 18 billion souls who do not yet know that they are already dead. I think about the children who will starve, the parents who will pray, the priests who will preach about martyrdom and sacrifice while the bodies pile up in the streets. I think about the faith that will be generated, the warp stability that will be gained, the cold and perfect efficiency of it all. And then I apply my seal. Because that is what I do. That is what we all do. In the end, we serve the Imperium. We execute the orders. We feed the machine. And the machine grinds on, eternal and implacable, crushing souls into faith and calling it devotion. This is the truth of the Imperium. This is the secret that the Administratum keeps, buried in restricted files and classification codes, hidden from the masses who still believe that the Emperor protects, that the system serves, that their suffering has meaning beyond its utility. The Emperor protects, but not you, not me, not the trillions who die in his name. He protects the Imperium, and the Imperium protects nothing but itself. I have learned to live with this truth. I have learned to function within it, to execute my duties without hesitation, to look at the numbers and see only numbers, to separate the abstract from the real, until the deaths I authorize become nothing more than entries in a ledger. This is survival in the Administratum. This is how you endure. You stop seeing people. You stop feeling guilt. You become the machine, and the machine has no conscience. But sometimes, in the quiet hours, the separation fails. Sometimes I look at a file and I see faces instead of numbers. I imagine the worlds I have condemned, the cities falling into ruin, the crowds gathering in the temples to pray for salvation that will never come. I imagine the moment when they realize that no help is coming, that the Imperium has abandoned them, that their faith was always meant to be spent, not rewarded, and I wonder what they think in those final moments. Do they curse the Emperor? Do they curse me? Or do they die still believing, still faithful, their devotion intact even as it kills them? I do not know. I will never know. The reports do not track such things. They only track the numbers, faith output, warp stability, tithe compliance. These are the metrics that matter. These are the measures of success. And by these measures, my work has been exemplary. I have been commended, promoted, rewarded. I have risen through the ranks of the Administratum faster than most, not because I am ambitious, but because I am efficient, because I understand the logic, because I do what needs to be done without complaint or hesitation. This is what loyalty looks like in the Imperium. Not devotion to people, not compassion for suffering. Loyalty to the system, to the structure, to the cold and brutal mathematics of survival at any cost. And the cost is always paid by someone else, by the faceless masses, by the expendable billions, by the souls who are born, suffer, and die without ever understanding that their lives were never meant to last, that they were always going to be spent in service of something larger and more terrible than they could comprehend. I think about the officers who gave me this assignment, the masked figures in the circular chamber who told me that this was orthodoxy, that this was the highest service. I think about their calm voices, their perfect logic, their absolute certainty. They were not monsters, they were not heretics, they were believers, true believers. They had looked at the machinery of the Imperium and understood it fully, and they had accepted it without reservation. They had made peace with the horror. I have not made peace, but I have made accommodation. I have learned to function, and that, I think, is worse. To know the truth and to serve it anyway, to see the atrocity and to participate in it, to become the thing you would have condemned once in another life, before you knew how the machine worked. There is no redemption for this, no absolution. The priests would tell me otherwise. They would say that service is its own reward, that suffering in the Emperor's name purifies the soul, that the guilty and the innocent alike are washed clean in the fire of faith. But the priests do not know what I know. They do not see the files. They do not authorize the die-offs. They stand in their pulpits and preach about sacrifice, but they do not choose who will be sacrificed. That burden falls to people like me. And it is a burden without end, without relief, without hope. I have tried to find meaning in the work. I have tried to tell myself that the suffering I cause serves a greater purpose, that the Imperium survives because of decisions like mine, that the alternative would be worse. And perhaps it would be. Perhaps, if the die-off stopped, the warp would become unstable, the crusades would fail, the Imperium would fracture and collapse, and humanity would be consumed by the darkness. Perhaps the logic is sound, perhaps the price is necessary, but necessity does not grant innocence, and logic does not grant absolution. I am complicit, we all are. Every functionary who processes the orders, every logistician who redirects the resources, every priest who preaches martyrdom, every soldier who enforces the quarantine, we are all part of the machine. And the machine exists to grind souls into faith, and faith into power, and power into survival. This is the Imperium. This is the Emperor's will, or at least the will of those who claim to speak for him. And we serve it because there is no alternative, because resistance is heresy, because the only choice we have is to be complicit or to be dead. I chose complicity. I chose survival, and I will carry that choice for the rest of my life, however long or short that may be. Because in the Imperium, there are no good choices. There are only calculations, only optimizations, only the endless arithmetic of atrocity. I close the file on Secundus Majoris and reach for the next one. The work continues. It always continues. There are always more worlds, always more die-offs, always more numbers to process, more projections to calculate, more deaths to authorize. The list is long, and I have only just begun. This is my service now. This is my duty. I am a proctor of the Administratum, 8th Echelon, Strategic Resource Management Division, and I am responsible for the deaths of billions. I do this work with precision and efficiency, and I am rewarded for it, and I will continue until I am no longer useful, until the machine decides that I too am expendable, that my service has reached its optimal value, and my continued existence is a waste of resources. When that day comes, I will not resist. I will accept my fate with the same cold logic that I have applied to so many others. I will understand that I am not special, that I am not exempt, that I too am fuel for the machine, and perhaps, in that final moment, I will feel something like peace. Or perhaps I will feel nothing at all. Perhaps I have already become so much a part of the machine that I have ceased to exist as anything else, that there is no matran kul anymore. Only a function, a process, a cog turning in the great and terrible engine of the Imperium. I do not know which would be worse. I sit at my desk in the grey light of morning, and I prepare to begin another day of work. The shrine to the Emperor watches me from the corner of the room, the candlelight steady and unwavering, and I think about the devotion I once felt, the faith that sustained me through years of tedium and routine. That faith is gone now, not destroyed, just transformed. I still believe in the Imperium, after a fashion. I believe in its power, its inevitability, its absolute and terrible necessity, but I do not love it. I do not revere it. I simply serve it, because there is nothing else. The Imperium does not ask for love. It asks for obedience. And obedience is all I have to give. Outside, the hive wakes to another day. The workers file into the factories. The servitors activate in their charging alcoves. The priests begin their morning prayers. The arbitrators patrol the streets. And somewhere, on worlds I will never see, populations continue to die, their suffering carefully managed, their faith harvested, their deaths logged in files that will eventually reach my desk. The machine functions, the system endures, and I am a part of it, forever and always, until the day I am consumed by it. This is the truth I learned when I was 43 years old. This is the secret of the Administratum, the hidden orthodoxy that underlies all imperial governance. And this is the burden I carry, the knowledge that I cannot unlearn, the stain that I cannot wash away. I am an auditor. I trace patterns. I find connections. And I have found the greatest and most terrible pattern of all. The Imperium lets trillions die because their deaths serve the Emperor, not the man on the throne, if that man still exists in any meaningful sense. But the idea, the symbol, the faith, the vast and incomprehensible machinery of belief and suffering that keeps the Imperium alive. And I, like so many others before me, have become an instrument of that machinery. I have accepted my role. I have executed my duties. I have looked into the abyss of imperial orthodoxy, and I have not turned away. I have become the abyss, and the work continues, always, forever, without end.